Well, let's talk about what really has happened, and nobody's picking up on it. And this is going to be determinative for the future. The United States and its NATO allies have invaded Russia. And let me repeat that. The United States and its NATO allies have invaded Russia using Ukraine as a proxy. They planned it, they helped organize it, they staffed it, they funded it, they supplied it. There were even some U.S. personnel and NATO personnel, citizens fighting alongside these Ukrainians. Can you imagine the reaction in the United States if there was a military invasion across either the Mexican or Canadian border into U.S. territory that resulted in the death and capture of American citizens? Do you think we'd sit back and go, oh, no big deal, we'd just, things happen? Or would you view it as an act of war? So what's happened now, this is now entering a new phase, because despite the propaganda that initially was put out, where the Ukrainians, they captured a bunch of border guards, they captured some lightly defended units, they took control of stores. You got lots of videos of these cats, were looting grocery stores and such and making fun of it and having a big laugh. They put it on video. The problem is the Russians have now caught them. Some of them are dead, and many of them are tied up as prisoners. So what Ukraine has put itself in is they're in a position that they cannot sustain, because every day you fire off a round of ammunition, you're going to have to replace that. Well, where do you replace it? You don't run down to the Army surplus store and buy it. It's got to be sent to you. And yet, one of the things they're doing is they're blowing up bridges behind themselves so that they can't even have a route of egress. This is so dangerous. And I know I've heard Scott talk about it. He's been in touch with some contacts in Russia, and they've been very clear to him that there's going to be a response on the Russian part that the West won't see coming, and it will be significant. It's not just going to be, a sternly worded letter.
Will this prove to be a disaster for the West and for Ukraine?
Yes. Well, it's already proving to be a disaster. When you look down into the Donbass, where the Russians' offensive, it's accelerating. There's picking up momentum. So the town of New York, not your New York City, but the New York in Ukraine has fallen. Plekkovo is in the process of falling, and that is a really key hub that has the Ukrainians panicked. But it's not just those two. It is literally up and down that line of contact, and we can't even get a straight story out of the Ukrainians, or frankly out of NATO, in terms of what was the objective of this Ukrainian operation around Kursk. Was it to attack the nuclear power, take control of the nuclear power plant? Or was it to force the Russians to divert troops to the Kursk region, take them off the front in the Donbass and ease pressure on the Ukrainian troops? Or was it to embarrass Putin, as if embarrassing him would somehow, win the war? Any kind of military operation needs to have a pretty clear objective, what you intend to accomplish by using force. It's the same with self-defense. If you're just going to try to beat somebody just to beat them up and pound them into the floor, well, what happens if they got brothers and cousins and they come back after you? You always got to think these things through. So the Ukrainians launched this operation. They had to basically cobble together some units from the front that was trying to hold back the Russians. And now they've weakened those positions in the Donbass to such an extent that, in the past, like 8 months ago, you're looking at maybe the Russians progressing a half kilometer or less a day. They're now moving 2 to 5 kilometers a day. So significant movement over the territory, and the sort of the pace of the decline of the Ukrainian military force in the Donetsk and Luhansk is accelerating.
Did Russian intel see this coming, or was there a failure of Russian intel?
Can I say yes?
Explain, please,
So,
Mr. Johnson.
yeah, so yes, they had the information that this was coming, and yes, they failed to act on it in a timely fashion to prevent it. So, and this is not the first time that you've had this kind of thing, whether in Russia or the United States or any other major country that's been involved with any kind of military operations. But I know that I'll call it the spin that's been put out after, is that the Russians set this up as a trap for the Ukrainians. Yeah, but they could have set the trap without having lost some of the personnel that they did early on, and have them be taken and captured by the Ukrainians. So it was both. It's like two beers taste great, less filling. It's
Right,
both.
right. All right. Is there public angst over a Russian military and Russian intelligence leadership coming from the rank and file military and the rank and file intelligence officers?
I think the anger has been dissipated by the fact of who Putin has put in charge of the operation now in Kursk. Very well respected, very popular guy. He's the one who actually headed up Russia taking back Crimea in 2014. So he was leading the troops back then. So
who is that, Larry?
His name is I think it's Demon. It's a Dyman, or Dymum. I'm not sure on the spelling.
Right.
But some people said, "Oh boy, Putin, he's really damaged by this. He's in trouble. He's on the ropes." And so, the images you saw yesterday was Vladimir Putin flying to Azerbaijan to visit on a state visit, visiting with his counterpart in Azerbaijan, getting off the plane, very relaxed, no sign of tension, greeting the other leader, not hanging his head, not. So there's a whole lot of propaganda spin that's coming out, and that's really all the United States and the West have left. What's really noteworthy is throughout this entire Kursk operation, you haven't seen the F-16 show up anywhere. It's because in theory those F-16s are there to help provide some cover for ground forces. That's not happening. So they've got those squirreled away. I think we really could be coming to the point where Russia may end up striking some NATO bases in Romania and Poland that are if they're actively involved in supplying weapons and intelligence that's being used to attack now inside Russia. They're targets.
I know that terminology is very important to the Kremlin and even to the Russian people throughout history. What is the difference between a war and a counter-terrorist operation from the vantage point of the Kremlin?
So, and let's not forget special military operation.
Right, that's what this originally was.
Yeah, so it starts off as the special military operation is, let's define what war would be. War would be eliminating all communications, taking out the entire grid immediately, taking out satellites, taking out all ISR. It would require the likelihood of civilian casualties, because you'd be striking certain centers and areas that right now the Russians have considered off limits in order to minimize civilian casualties. Possibility that civilian casualties would go way up, that would make it a war. What makes turning it into a counterterrorism operation is basically, unless these terrorists, as they're being labeled by the Russians, the Ukrainians running around Kursk, unless they surrender immediately, they're going to be killed, and in some cases, they may still be shot. So they're treated. They are treated quite differently. So up to this point, Russia really has pursued a limited military strategy with respect to Ukraine in terms of its special military operation. It is not. It is still allowed some of the Western ISR, the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities to operate. Once they go to a war footing, those come down. Those are targets. And, I understand the Russians have wanted to avoid expanding this and letting this get out of hand. But I think the West is forcing their hand, that they say, okay, you want a total war, then you'll get a total war. That's where we're headed.
Do you know from your sources, Larry, if American human beings, American citizens, whether CIA, whether contractors, whether military, were involved in this invasion of Kursk?
Only from reports on the ground that they were hearing Americans, people speaking with an American accent. Not a lot, but some. And it wouldn't surprise me. But the key to this is now you've seen across the board, not just with the United States, but UK and the Canadian pipsqueaks, where they're allowing their weapons to be used inside Russia. They're encouraging it. They're talking about it openly. And again, it's just like, can everybody take a big, deep breath, take a step back, and imagine that the shoe's on the other foot, that this was Russia or China doing that to us.
Right.
Would we view that as a threat that would require going to war? Yes, it is. That's what we're playing with here.
Larry, the Chinese floated a weather balloon over Alaska about a year ago, and the country went crazy over it. You can imagine how we would react if troops had crossed the Bering Straits from Russia into Alaska. Yet, and you can guess where this comes from, the Washington Post headline over the weekend is Putin rattled, Putin in a panic. This is what the CIA wants the public to think.
Right. Yeah. That boy, we got him on the run. And again, I had an acquaintance send me that. Said, "Oh, see, Putin's in trouble." And I said, "What? Really? Did you watch the video of him walking off the plane? I mean, you can tell body language. You can tell somebody's stressed out. He's relaxed, sauntering. He's not upset or worried about this because they're taking care of business, not taking care of it in the way the West thinks that the Russians ought to do. Which again is it is hilarious in a macabre sense that the West, particularly the United States, wants to lecture Russia on how to conduct military operations with our track record of failure. I mean, it'd be one thing if we had success, but we're like the guy that bankrupts a company and now we want to tell other people how they should be making money. Okay? And, at that point, a little humility is in order, that we should just, shut up, mind our own business.
Is Zelensky, Ukrainian President Zelensky, crazy enough to target Russian nuclear facilities?
I think so. Yes. They are desperate. This is, when you're winning, when things are going your way, you're not panicked. You're confident. You move forward with a deliberate sense of where you're headed, whether you're talking about a person or a country or an army. And that's what you're seeing right now in Kiev is panic, genuine panic on their side. Again, this is with the Washington Post headline about Putin. All it's doing is projecting onto Russia what's actually taking place in Ukraine, because they're run out of options. They're looking at the fact that their military lines are collapsing in the Donbass, that they're going to lose the Donbass. They've virtually had sort of control of it now for the last 10 years. That's going. And once that line breaks, the only thing that stands between the Russians and Kiev is the River Dnieper. And actually, half of Kiev is on the east side of the Dnieper anyway.
Here's President Zelensky yesterday saying that he's trying to, this sounds absurd, but this is what he says, trying to create a buffer zone inside of Russia. Cut number 5, Chris.
Today, we achieved good and much-needed results in destroying Russian equipment near Toretsk. And all this is more than just defense for Ukraine. It is now our primary task in defensive operations overall, to destroy as much Russian war potential as possible and conduct maximum counteroffensive actions. This includes creating a buffer zone on the aggressor's territory, our operation in the Kursk region.
Yeah, so he's mixing and matching here. So he's talking about what they're doing in Toretsk. Well, Toretsk is down, way south of Kursk. And so, and this goes back to the shift in strategy. Now the shift is, we want to create this buffer zone, so it's going to force the Russians to divert troops up there. Hello, Russia has ample trained reserves. Ukraine does not. It's a simple fact. The Russian army is estimated now to be in excess of 1.4 million men. That's double what they were 2.5 years ago. But the Ukrainian army, by contrast, which back then was, they had about 800,000 as well, maybe another 400,000 in reserve. They're actually down probably below 500,000 men. And, which sounds like a lot, but it's not a lot when you're suffering just enormous casualties. And I know my friend Andrei Martyanov, who's really one of the best military experts out there in terms of following Russia, he's pretty certain that the actually death toll for the Ukrainian forces is now in excess of 1 million, which I think is entirely believable.
This morning, our dear friend and colleague Alistair Crook told us, I'm switching gears now to Israel and Gaza and Hezbollah, that Netanyahu is in danger of a military coup because the fury at his leadership from Mossad, Shin Bet, and the IDF has now spilled over into the public.
Mm-hmm.
And to make matters even worse, according to Alistair, Ben Gvir, who's the rough equivalent of the head of their FBI, has assembled a small army. It's not like the IDF, but there are thousands of people in it, including police, border guards, the type of individuals that are subject to his command. Does any of this surprise you?
No. We've had the sort of the indications of it now coming out over the last 4 weeks, where you had an open rift between the head of the military saying, hey, we can't militarily defeat Hamas. Hamas is really an idea, and getting immediate pushback from Netanyahu. It'd be one thing if Israel and the Zionist contingent that leads it was they're all pulling in the same direction, but they're not. They're pulling in different directions, and you do have this real rift separating those like Ben Gvir, Smotrich, the ultra religious. It's not even proper maybe to use the term religious, but they believe that all of that land is theirs and that nobody else, including any Palestinians that have been there for generations, have a right to it and must be exterminated. And they cite scripture to say justify the extermination of the Amaleks, and Netanyahu himself has used that. Then you have a more secular, let's call it Western educated, less religiously driven group of people
Which
who
Netanyahu once was.
once was. Well, yeah, he's a chameleon, moves back and forth. But you got some of those professionals in the army, in Mossad and Shin Bet, who are pushing back. And I'm sure Israel does have the intelligence capability to collect. They can see what's going on in Iran now. And all the plans that Israel had for attacking Iran and taking out key installations is sort of gone up in smoke because Russia has moved in. Russia has equipped the Iranians with advanced air defense systems and personnel to operate it, among other things. So the calculations that Israel must make in terms of how to plan any kind of attack, they had to go sort of back to the drawing board. And they recognize that this is a much more formidable task. And at the same time, they're facing a step up in activity from Hezbollah. And Hezbollah they killed a chief warrant officer overnight, which is he's not quite a senior officer, but is still an officer. He was killed with a drone. So Hezbollah is now demonstrating they can assassinate Israelis, just like Israelis have been assassinating members of Hezbollah. And Hezbollah hasn't even begun to flex the muscles that it's capable of. And if they're coordinating with Iran, and I can't believe that they would not, there's a way that they can coordinate with Iran and launch an attack on Israel that Israel cannot counter. We've already seen Hezbollah rockets go into northern Israel, and the Iron Dome failed to intercept them. Now, was that failure because those rockets were moving so fast, or was it a cyber attack by Iran on the Iron Dome system that prevented it from operating? So there's the dynamics at play here are so powerful, and the potential so dangerous. We're sitting between Ukraine and Israel. We're sitting on a hair trigger. And if anybody doesn't know what a hair trigger is, it's on a firearm you got the trigger. It's literally, if you touch it, it'll go off. That's I think the situation we're in.
Here's Secretary Blinken, as we speak, Larry, is in Egypt, but earlier today, Monday, August 19, he made a statement in the presence of Isaac Herzog, the president of Israel, not Prime Minister Netanyahu. Here's what he said, cut number 7.
I'm here as part of an intensive diplomatic effort on President Biden's instructions to try to get this agreement to the line and ultimately over the line. It is time for it to get done. It's also time to make sure that no one takes any steps that could derail this process. And so we're working to make sure that there is no escalation, that there are no provocations, that there are no actions that in any way could move us away from getting this deal over the line, or, for that matter, escalating the conflict to other places and to greater intensity.
Let me get this straight, Mr. Secretary. The Israelis murdered the chief negotiator on the other side. The whole world that has a pulse can see that Netanyahu does not want a ceasefire. Does anybody believe what Tony Blinken just said?
Well, and it's actually, I think it's more craven, cowardly on his part. All they're doing, they're wanting to get a deal that they can come back and sell to the American people as, hey, we got peace in the Middle East, whether or not it's actually a real deal, whether or not it actually changes anything on the ground. They want to do that in order to score some political points at home. Meanwhile, the peace talks that they started initially in Qatar, they didn't invite Hamas. So you didn't have the representative from Hamas. How do you have peace talks about bringing peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians when the principal representative for the Palestinians, Hamas, is not at the peace talks? And guess what? Hamas rejected those talks. Boy, there's a shocker. And then overnight, an Israeli delegation flew to Egypt. Apparently, they were going there for some longer talks. I guess they got on the ground. They were there for about an hour or two. They turned around and went back home. The process is falling apart. This is just a desperate political move by the Biden administration. And they're not they're doing everything else they can to stoke the fire by deploying so many U.S. naval and Air Force combat equipment into the region. It's just, like I said, we've scattered the gasoline about, we've got the gunpowder out, and we're decided it's time to smoke a cigarette.
I think you used the perfect word when you said craven. I want you to see how craven this State Department is. You and Ray and I talked about this extensively. If you'll remember, a little Palestinian girl trapped in a car. The family had been killed. The EMS comes to try and save her. They get killed. She gets killed, and now the Israelis are supposedly investigating this. This happened on January 29th. This is a montage that Chris put together of a very courageous and articulate journalist grilling the two clownish spokespersons for the State Department and their answers about this tragedy. Cut number 2.
It's been over 2 weeks since Israeli forces attacked Hind Rajab's family, killing her aunt, uncle, and cousins, leaving her trapped alone in her vehicle. We heard her pleas to the Red Crescent Society. 2 medics were sent, all to be blown up, allegedly by Israeli forces. I wanted to ask about the status of the inquiry into this.
So I think that question is appropriately directed to the government of Israel. I will say on behalf of the United States, we have made clear to them that we want that incident to be investigated. They have told.
Any updates on Hind Rajab's, the investigation into the killing of Hind Rajab's family and the paramedics sent to save her?
I don't have an update. My understanding is that the investigation is ongoing.
So I'm wondering if you have updates on not just the investigations, but actual accountability measures in response to these. And if not, how can this administration's approach of relegating things to months-long investigations while not changing policy, all as thousands more are killed, be a justified approach?
Investigations in some cases take time.
Secondly, it's been 101 days now since Hind Rajab, her family members, the medics sent to save her were killed. So first question related to that is there an update on the investigation into that attack?
I don't have anyone. I'm happy to go back and get you the latest.
Okay. Is there an update into this investigation?
Let me get you an answer on that and come back to you.
Is it really an independent investigation if the alleged culprits are the ones conducting the strike?
What I said is we thought it's appropriate for the government of Israel to investigate.
Last month, when myself and other colleagues asked about the investigation into this, the department said Israel said that they're still investigating, and that Israel also said that the UN and Red Crescent did not respond to outreach from the Israeli government. I reached out to the Red Crescent, and they said that no, the Israeli government did not reach out. So has the Biden-Harris administration followed up on this alleged lie about the Israeli government, or sought to confirm any of Israel's claims on the half-year-old killing now of this girl and her family?
So we are in touch with our partners in Israel around the clock on a variety of issues. I don't have any specifics to read out as it relates to this conversation. I'm happy to.
It's now 197 days since Hind Rajab was killed, her family members were killed, the medics sent to save her were killed. What's the update on that?
I don't have any updates for you.
This is the State Department that Ambassador Charles Freeman calls the worst in the post-World War II era.
Yeah. And Ambassador Freeman's been around a while to seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly. In war, there is always the chance that you're going to kill civilians unintentionally, that there is no intent to kill civilians. But that's not what we're seeing in Israel. There's clear intent to kill civilians, including children and pregnant women and elderly men and disabled individuals, people with physical and or mental handicaps. I mean, these are not isolated incidents. And it's the same thing, the same reason that the Israeli soldiers also shot and killed 3 of their own who were trying to, they were showing signs that, hey, they were surrendering. They'd been taken hostage. They got free of their hostage takers, trying to get back to the Israeli side. And they got shot, unarmed. So this is unfortunately just further evidence of the inhuman conduct of these Zionists. I don't want to necessarily impugn all Israelis, but certainly those who are obsessed with Zionism. This is what you get: the murder of a little girl, pleading and crying for help, and heartless in killing that child.
Thank you, Larry. That was very eloquent. Very, very eloquent. Appreciate everything you've done. Thanks so much. We'll see you again Friday with the youngster McGovern and for the Intelligence Community Roundtable. All the best.
I'll be there. Thank you, Judge.
Okay.